Welcome back to At Home with Cathy. Now last week we started with these stools. These are a pair of tall dining room stools that we're using to match the Swedish decor we started in the dining room last season. We painted them in Scandinavian pink, and because I did use stencils in the dining room, I went over it with the same stencil I used on the curtains and on the top of the chairs, dining room chairs. It's just a little kind of florally pattern, very simple, and I did it in an Antoinette. And then I was going to white wax them both, and I decided after white waxing part of the first stool that I didn't really like it. The white wax wasn't grabbing the pink paint the way I thought it would. So what I did was I dark waxed the whole thing, wiped it all off, and then white waxed over it. And as you can see, the white wax kind of gripped where the brown wax was. And I really like it. It gives it kind of an old weathered look. I like the way it finished. I'll show you. Just tip this forward a little bit. I have a beautiful sheen on it. It kind of aged or antiqued the stencil just a little bit, and I'm very pleased with that finish. So the original finish from the Paint Transformations Quick and Easy from the Annie Sloan book was the solid painted furniture, which was what I did. I just changed the waxing process. Dark wax first, and then white wax over the top. So let's get started on this week's project. Hi, I'm Cathy, and welcome back to At Home with Cathy. We are going to do something really kind of interesting with this little hall table. It's a plant table, and as you can see, it's had a lot of plants over the years, and the finishes come off it. It's been moved all around the place. I could strip this and refinish it, but I'm going to paint it. And I know some of you are cringing saying, oh, she's doing that to an antique. But here's the thing. If I have to strip this and refinish it to make it look new, I've already taken some of the value from it of being an antique. Painting it won't hurt that. If I decide years from now I would like to have it back to wood, I'll just strip the paint off, strip this finish off, and redo it. So we're following the Quick and Easy Paint Transformations. This is a very simple guide on how to change things in your home that you already have using Annie Sloan chalk paint. This one's a fun one. I don't have the bookcase with the glass doors, but what intrigued me was seeing all these little sort of worked in recessed pieces on this bookcase, and I thought, oh, I kind of have that down here with this, and I have it here with these notches. And this is a table I've been wanting to paint. So we're going to paint this table. Again, I'm not always using the same colors because the colors that might be in this piece aren't the colors I need in my home. We are going to use the old ochre, which is sort of a blocker. And then we're going to do Emperor Silk, this beautiful red. We're going to top coat it in graphite. We're going to finish it in dark waxing, but we're going to do a few steps in between to help bring the red out. So let's get started. The first thing is to do a quick coat in the old ochre. I have begun to fall in love a bit with old ochre. It is a fabulous color for blocking. So when you want to get rid of a dark color, like a red in a wood, old ochre is your best bet. It acts like a primer. And as you can see, I'm not spending a whole lot of time on this. It's not about the brush strokes and making it all look perfect. This is a base coat. Just a nice even coverage. I don't want any drips. That's one of the things you have to think about when you're doing something that has the little indents like this, because it will drip into there. Kind of the paint will collect. I'm going to do all of one side. Gotta love the round brushes because they just wiggle their way right into all of the little nooks and crannies. And we'll do a close-up here of, I do need to make sure I get the paint into all of the indentations of this wood. I want to make sure that all the dark is covered. A little bit tricky to get in behind here. I have to thank Sean, our cameraman, for the great idea to create this turntable. We were shooting one of the other shows the first of the season, and it's a lot of work to actually move around each piece, especially when they're big, or move the pieces and keep the paint can going and not walk in front of the camera. So Sean looked up a suggestion from one of our hardware stores, and I spent part of a Sunday afternoon building a turntable, which I'm going to do step-by-step instructions on because it really only took about an hour to build, and it is making painting life much faster. As long as I don't knock the paint off onto the floor. What I like about this finish too, this piece has some dings and chips in the wood. When we're finished, you'll never see that anymore. That'll all just disappear when the paint covers it, because the paint is not intended to be a smooth finish. I'm using the smallest of the round brushes too, because I find it gets right into the pieces. I don't need a lot of paint on my brush. I just need a nice sort of steady amount so I can work it in. If I have too much paint on the brush, I'm just going to have to go back and pick up all the drips, and that just takes more time. We'll spin it around and do the top, finish this last leg. I'm going to have to come up with a little paint stand now. I can see this is just going to evolve into a whole lot of tools that get developed so that you can chalk paint more easily. Wiggle your brush all the way around to get into all those little crevices. Now when you're doing 3 coats of something, you don't have to worry about complete coverage, because it will get hidden by the second or the third coat. And because we're doing a deliberate layering, that's okay to see a little bit. I'll bring this back over here and flip up my corner. And I'm going to continue to paint the top. I don't usually paint the underside of the table. There's no real reason to. It's not going to be seen in real life. But I will give you a hint. If you're ever curious about what a finish is going to look like, and before you get all invested and have everything painted, paint the underside and play with your finish. It's a great sort of trial place. Nobody will see it, and you will get to see how the paint or the wax or the finish looks before you commit to the whole piece. It's like the underside of a drawer if you're doing a dresser. Okay, I can see the next thing is going to be to cut all the cloths to round circles so that they fit on the table better. just give it a little spin, make sure I don't have any drips anywhere and that I've got most of the coverage, and I do. I tend to put tables and everything actually that has legs up on pieces of wood because it makes it easier to do two things. See the dog hair that might be attached to the bottom of that leg, and also it just lifts off the wood better than it lifts off the fabric. I can paint all the way down. And I'm just going to paint right around here. It's like icing a cake. Quick look all the way around here, and then the last thing I'm going to do is paint the top. And when I paint the top, I am going to paint it making sure that I have it on the grain, painting it back and forth. Start from the middle, paint all the way. I'm just tall enough to do this. Probably should have a little step ladder. Paint it, paint right to the edges and make sure that I get into all the wood. This is an oak table. It has a strong grain. And we actually want the paint to go right into that grain. And it's kind of interesting because this is one oak finish. We're going to do another oak finish in our next show, and we're going to do something completely different. So it'll be kind of an interesting effect to see the two different oak pieces of furniture with two different looks. Okay. She's all painted, and we're going to let it dry, and then we're going to come back and do the second coat. So we're ready for the second stage on the plant table, our oak table. We did the first coat in old ochre. We're going to do the second one in emperor silk, this beautiful rich red. Exactly the same thing. We're going to paint it on. There's always a little bit of a heart-stopping moment when you first put something like a very strong color over something like the old ochre or old white. It's like, oh, and then you go, oh, that looks so pretty. And now I do want to make sure that I cover my old ochre. Don't really want to see any of that creamy color coming through very much. So I'm going to use my, again, another small round brush, because I find that little round brush is what gets into all these little places so much better. Sometimes I think I'd like to cut one off and have it just be a half brush. Okay, so the same thing. We're going to have to go over all of the feet. Really wiggle that brush into all the little nooks and crannies. Don't load it up with a whole lot of paint, because you're just going to have to go back and pick up drips. For something like this, you're better off to work with the smaller amounts of paint. Okay, so we're just finishing up our emperor silk, and Zoe just joined us to see how progress is coming. Hey, Zoe? Chase the kitty out. The goal here is to cover as much of that old ochre primer as we can with a nice coat of emperor silk. And then we're going to put this aside to dry and come back to it with the final coat of graphite. So we need this to be good and dry before we do that. If you try to work with paint before it's dry, sometimes that's the texture you want, because you will get a nice kind of old paint effect. And Zoe is trying to sit behind Sean. Come on, Zoe. Over here, Zoe. She would like to be behind the camera. So sometimes when you're painting, you want that dried, kind of the paint brush to drag through semi-dry paint because it creates quite a bit of texture. But the other thing it'll do is it will pick up, if it's wet paint, it will pick up the color underneath and you'll end up with a blend. So if my old ochre hadn't dried and I was picking it up using the Emperor Silk, I'd get kind of an ivory color. So now I'm just going to paint my tabletop. I always paint from the center out so that I don't get buildup of paint. I just put my fingers in it underneath. I'll have to go touch that up. I don't want a big glob of paint on the outside of this table. I want to keep that nice and smooth. Work the paint all the way around into all of that old ochre so that the top is fully covered. I have to get a stepping stool. Okay, I think I've got good coverage there. I did put my hand in it here, so I'll just touch that up. And I'm just going to go over it to make sure I don't have any drips anywhere, especially with these, the little grooves that are part of the table stand. I don't want any, this is where paint would pool. It's just inside here. So I don't want that. I want to just go back and brush that out. Double check to make sure I've got, oh, I see a little bit right here. It's really tricky to see the inside of everything, like the inside of those legs. And I did forget to do underneath the legs. So I just tipped the table back. And I did all the other three, and I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to do them in the red. I'm not as worried about them being seen. So if they don't have the old ochre, that'll be okay. Yeah. I think we're done. We'll put this to dry, and we'll come back and do graphite. So we're back to the third coat of our oak plant stand. We did the first one in the old ochre. We've done the second one in Emperor Silk. Now we're going to do a graphite over it. In this book, it's the Annie Sloan Paint Transformation book. She did it with olive on the outside. But the room I have this plant stand in actually has a print in it that's got a lot of red and black. And so I thought it would be a little bit more dramatic to have the graphite and the Emperor Silk. So the last coat is exactly the same as the others. We're just going to take our graphite, give it a quick stir, and we're going to paint a nice coat over our Emperor Silk. Now graphite is an interesting color. None of the chalk paints by Annie Sloan have any real black in them. And from an artistic point of view, that's a good thing because it stops the colors from being muddy. And by muddy, I mean if you have too many colors together, it doesn't take very long before you have brown instead of, or greeny brown, instead of whatever color you thought you might be creating. So graphite is actually a very deep, deep navy. We're going to wax this using a dark wax, which is going to give the graphite a little bit more depth when we're all done. But for now, we're just going to do a nice coat. So now if I have a little bit of the red coming through, that's okay, because I'm actually going to take away a little bit of red, or sorry, a little bit of the graphite to reveal the red. So it's not such a catastrophe if it's there now, showing through just a little bit. Again, I don't want a lot, but I want it to kind of peek through. but I want to control where it peeks through. So we're going to do a pretty good coat here of graphite. When you paint graphite over something like this, you can actually see the blue in it. Go all around, paint the uppers and the lowers, get into all of the nooks and crannies. So because we have 3 coats of paint on here now, our old ochre, our emperor silk, and finally the graphite, it's going to take a little while to dry. So in the essence of video time, we speeded things up a little bit, used a hairdryer, and just dried one of the legs so that I can show you the technique, because I'll finish this up and show you how it looks when we're all done, but just to give you the technique. This is something a little bit different, and probably I should have tried this before I do it on video, but let's have a go. Put the hairdryer down. You need a round brush, and you need to dampen it. It has to be wet for this technique, because what's going to happen is we're going to dip our wet brush into clear wax, and we're going to use the brush to pull some of this graphite back off the red paint. The water from the brush is going to help pull the paint while the wax is going to finish it. So let's try this. I can see this is coming off just a little bit. Now I maybe have the brush a little bit too wet. I'll dry it a little bit more. I've got I have a whole bunch of these wiping cloths, and I use them in all kinds of ways here. We're going to wiggle it in. You have to go gently because I don't want to scrape any paint off. I can see the red just coming through here just a little bit. What's going to happen is I'm going to go all over my little table with this wax and water combination, pulling out the red where I want it to be, which is down the edges a little bit. Then I'm going to let it sit overnight and come back and polish it. So if you look on it, you can just see where the red is coming out on all the raised pieces. Just a little bit, just along the edge. I'm going to give it a beautiful finish when it's done. Again, if you did this and it was horrible, you could just wipe the whole thing down, repaint it, try it again. The beauty of chalk paint is it's very, very forgiving. And I think that what would happen as I'm going along, seeing how this works, is that every so often I'm going to have to clean the wax out of my brush to kind of start again. And pick the dog hairs off. Always picking the dog hairs off. If my paint is still wet, and it is a little bit on this side, I'm going to end up just scraping all of the graphite off, so I don't want to do that. I dried this side. Stick to this side. I'm going to go in where those little carving is right here, and I'm just going to see if I can wiggle a little bit of paint out of that area too. Just so you see a little bit of the red that was in the underneath. And I can see that I do have to keep wiping the wax off my brush. So we'll let this dry. I will finish the whole thing once the paint is thoroughly dry, naturally. And when you join us next week for At Home with Cathy, this piece will be all finished and we'll show you the end result. Hope you enjoyed the show. We look forward to you joining us at the store for either a workshop or coming in to talk about your paint project. Bring pictures. We love the ideas, and we are definitely open to help you get as addicted as we are to chalk paint by Annie Sloan. Thank you.